Well, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, depending on where you are. So I'm Shengen Fan, the panel member and the chair professor at the China Agricultural University. So welcome to this event. It's a United Nations Food Systems Pre-Summit affiliated session, repurposing or rebalancing public agriculture support for health, for prosperity, and for the planet policy realities. So here I wanted to thank the World Bank to partner with us with a global panel in organizing this session. So it's great that we have so many attendees to join us. I think right now we have more than 50. The number is still climbing, and I think we have several hundred people registered for this event. And here, obviously, we are discussing a very important policy changes in order to transform our food system, that is subsidies. So how we're going to repurpose or rebalance the subsidies for better nutrition, better health, better environment, and mitigate the climate change. So without further ado, I will turn the floor to Marco Spreeman, who is going to present the key results from a modeling exercise supported by the global panel and the World Bank. Marco, you have 7 to 8 minutes. By the way, Marco is a researcher at the Martin School of Environment at the Oxford University. So Marco, you have 7 to 8 minutes.
Thanks a lot, Shengen. Let me make sure I can share my slides with you right now. Do you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So the background you will be very much aware of. The current food system is neither healthy nor sustainable. A lot of things will need to happen for the food system to stay within its environmental limits or planetary boundaries. But one of the big ones are dietary changes and changes in the mix of production, without which it won't be possible to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, specifically in line with both global targets and with environmental limits. At the same time, consumption changes can address the health burden of the food system in dramatic ways. But in order for that to happen, there really needs to be substantial changes away from Western diets with high consumption of meat and dairy to diets that are more balanced and predominantly plant-based. Not completely plant-based, but much more plant-based than now. Concomitant to those consumption changes, there need to be changes in production, obviously. So instead of ever producing more staple crops, sugar crops, and animal source foods, there really needs to be a massive increase in the production of fruits, vegetables, legumes, and nuts in order to provide the basis for healthy and sustainable diets in the future. Agricultural subsidies are important incentive for basically supporting farmers to grow one thing or another. In OECD countries, they constitute around 25% of the overall value of production. In non-OECD countries, it's 15%. So in our study, we wanted to look at what role could agricultural subsidy reform play in supporting those necessary shifts towards healthier and more sustainable diets. We wanted to develop options for subsidy reform and assess impacts on food production, consumption, environmental resource demand, diet-related mortality, and economic welfare. And we did that by coupling a whole economy model with good agricultural detail to country and crop-specific environmental footprints and a comparative risk assessment of dietary and weight-related risk factors. So the chain of impacts went from changes in subsidies to changes in production and associated with that changes in the environmental impacts, then mediated through market feedbacks, changes in consumption and the associated health impacts, and then from that to changes in economic welfare, again with feedbacks not only from consumption but also from health when you look at the labor market. The scenarios we looked at is a complete removal of subsidies, just as a counterfactual to see what subsidies contribute at the moment. And then a range of repurposing scenarios where, for example, 50 to 100% of all subsidies are repurposed for low emitting and nutrition sensitive food commodities, which we took in our analysis to be fruits, vegetables, legumes, and nuts, so horticultural products basically. And one set of scenarios where we combined that repurposing also with a restructuring, where we kept the current level of subsidies constant, but we changed which countries can contribute what amount to subsidies. And here we looked at a share of GDP and share of population that determines allowable subsidy levels. So the subsidies we are talking about and we included in the analysis don't include border measures and tariffs, so they're really only budgetary transfers, and those amounted to 233 billion in 2017. And you can see here that in the OECD, the EU, USA, and Japan were the biggest dispersers of subsidies, of such subsidies, and non-OECD countries, it was China and India. Only a small portion of those subsidies, if you look here at the world one to the left, was dispersed to single commodity transfers. Most other ones were either to groups, to no commodities at all, so just provided without strings attached, and some were in the form of other transfers to producers. When you look at what producers used subsidies for, then you see that only a small portion was used for growing horticultural products like fruits and vegetables, as you see here with the green graph. That also means that if you take those subsidies and you repurpose a bigger portion of those for supporting horticultural production, there could be quite a lot of impact there. So in the largest effect, you can see if all subsidies are repurposed, then that would be an increase of horticultural production by about 20% and a total increase of 100 megatons per year. Said the other way around, if you remove agricultural subsidies, you also see that there is a reduction in food production in total and for those health sensitive food groups as well, since some of them had been supported before. You can also see the structural reform options lead to different distributions of those impacts. The environmental impact of those changes is such that whenever you either take subsidies away or you take them away from foods that are not particularly environmentally friendly, like animal source foods, and you subsidize low emitting horticulture products, you can expect some reduction in greenhouse gas emissions of the order of around 20 megatons of CO2 equivalent per year. That is about, for example, in OECD countries, that's about 2%. So a moderate reduction, nonetheless a reduction. The changes in consumption followed the changes in production, but they were mediated by market feedback. So instead of a 20% increase in production, you get a 10% increase in consumption, because that increase, for example, in OECD countries is spread more widely also to other countries. At the peak, when you just look at horticultural consumption, there is an increase of more than 50 grams per day. This is half a portion of fruits and vegetables per day. And even in non-OECD countries, you have 30 grams per day. That would be basically a third of a portion every day that would be eaten more in those countries. Again, if you remove them, less would be consumed. If you look at restructuring according to GDP and population combined with a repurposing, you see that the change in consumption would be more equally distributed, especially if you look at the scenario where subsidies are dispersed according to population, the share of population. What does that mean for health? Well, if you remove the subsidies, there is a penalty to health. There would be more diet-related disease deaths because people on average would eat less fruits and vegetables specifically. And the other way around, if you subsidize greater production and consumption of horticultural products, there would be a health benefit that would reach up to would reach more than 200,000 deaths, diet-related deaths that could be prevented in both OECD and non-OECD countries in this analysis here. So the maximum number value of averted diet-related deaths would be in excess of 400,000, which is really not bad. Now, lastly, the economic impacts. Well, here you can see two things really. For one, you have changes in allocative efficiency because you have greater coupling of subsidies. That means you have a greater level of prescribing the economy what to do, and that results in usually less returns because factors of production might be more economically efficiently used in other sectors. So that's the gray bar. But that is compensated in some scenarios by changes in the labor force. That's the population effect, because of better health, basically. So if you have less diet-related deaths, you have a greater and healthier labor force, and that compensates the changes in allocative efficiency in scenarios where a portion, the S50 here, for example, a portion of subsidies is repurposed for horticultural products, or if all are repurposed and those and the structure of subsidies or the distribution of subsidies is changed. What you see in the last one is also, even though countries that currently don't subsidize, that is without subsidy here, the last one, they basically have a net reduction in economic welfare. The global changes are such that those could be compensated, basically, but those would be there would be additional policy needed to make sure that all countries share into the benefits. So the upshot of all this is that removing all agricultural subsidies could be economically and environmentally beneficial, but it could negatively impact population health. So subsidies, as they are, surely provide some benefit when it comes to health. Coupling of subsidies to production of nutrition-sensitive crops could improve population health, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but could have negative economic impacts. Partial coupling, for example, 50% of all subsidies, could mitigate the economic losses, but would also reduce health and environmental benefits. Restructuring subsidies across countries could result in more equal distribution of the health benefits, avoid economic losses, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but might require some transfer payments for countries that currently don't subsidize, and that would then potentially have a loss if they just started to. The policy implications are such that, well, how can you think about implementing those? And we probably will talk more about this in this session. But one could imagine, for example, that in the short term there would some conditioning of subsidies be introduced, and in the long term the restructuring tackled in some form. There is a shift, at least in OECD countries, even though subsidies have been increasingly decoupled. There is now the discussion of providing public money for public goods, which stresses the importance of healthiness and sustainability of food production. So there is a strong discussion now that that would provide the basis for having some conditioning of subsidies. In total, I would say those results suggest that health and environmentally sensitive approaches to subsidy reform could make meaningful contributions to a transition towards healthier and more sustainable food systems. Of course, there are other things that could be done, and here I just want to highlight the Foresight report that Glopan published, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Marco. I think the message is clear. The current subsidies are not economically efficient, they are not sustainable, they do not produce healthy and nutritious foods. But removing them could also cause some harms. So the nuance is very, very important. So simply just the repurposing, rebalancing is not good enough. I think optimize the subsidy use, depends on the context, depends on the country, will be so critical. Thank you, Marco. Now let's move to our next speaker, Madhur Gautam, who is a lead economist at the World Bank. So he has worked quite a bit on subsidy issues on agricultural and rural development policies. Madhur, you have 7 to 8 minutes. Please unmute.
Yes, good morning, Cheng, and thank you. I'm trying to get my presentation to go full screen. There we go. Good morning. And good afternoon, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks to the global panel for organizing this event. So we are, of course, extremely pleased to co-host the event on this very important topic. How do we realign our public policies? Transforming food systems is a very high priority for the World Bank. Transforming food systems to deliver healthier people, healthier planet, and healthier economies is the new focus of is the new strategic focus the World Bank has adopted. In that context, and earlier before that, we have been working with the International Food Policy Research Institute on looking at what it might mean if we were to sort of look at these public policies, which Marco has laid an excellent groundwork for. There's a substantial amount of policies support that's provided to agriculture. The question is it serving the right purposes? The results I'm going to present today are very brief set of results from a rather extensive analysis that's been done, and it's ongoing. And I just want to share some of these results to sort of give you a flavor of where we're coming out. The messages actually are quite consistent with what Marco has just presented. It's not surprising because it is nice because it confirms that different approaches and different models are giving similar answers. As we all know, remarkable progress has been made. I won't spend too much time on this, but we know that food production has increased. Most of this has come through productivity. Agricultural land expansion has taken place. It appears relatively minor in terms of its contribution to overall food growth, but nevertheless, it has been about 360 million hectares. That causes a lot of environmental damage. At the same time, what we see now is the impact of climate change that seems to be coming up. We have the severe headwinds in the progress that's been made. What we see is food production per capita trends are now sort of starting to decline for the last about 10 years or so, and volatility is starting to increase. And some of this is directly related to climate change. A recent research, some insightful research, shows that climate change is already having a huge impact on agriculture productivity. Agriculture productivity measured as total factor productivity, which is the correct way to look at agriculture productivity. Here, what we see is the overall global average decline in productivity growth is 21%, but it's almost half, about 40 or even more than 40% in sub-Saharan Africa, where we see some of the largest rises in acute food insecurity and hunger in the world, and that's where the poverty and the hunger problem seems to be mostly concentrated, but also in the Caribbean and parts of East Asia and some parts of South Asia. The biggest part of the story is that these changes are accelerating, which does not bode well for the agricultural production and agriculture productivity going forward. Now, core question then comes down to, as you said, agriculture, of course, is hugely impacted by agriculture, but agriculture is also a culprit. Agriculture contributes about 1/3 of global greenhouse emissions. So the question is, what can we do, and how are we supporting agriculture that delivers better outcomes in terms of environmental, but also in terms of nutrition, and making agriculture more sustainable and continuing to sustain food security going into the future. So the latest results we have, this is expanding on the OECD database, working with the IO consortium on agriculture incentives. That includes IFPRI, OECD, FAO, World Bank, and Inter-American Development Bank. And the results show that about 79 countries provide about $630 million. Overall support to agriculture is 720 million plus, but then the support to producers is about, for agricultural producers, is about 630 million. Of that, the vast majority is in the form of distorted producer support subsidies. Very small shares are in the form of public goods. And the good news, I guess, is that countries have started to put some additional resources into green subsidies, but by and large, what we see is the largest share of the support provided to producers is in the form of the distortive input subsidies and market price support, input-output subsidies and market price support, and relatively small shares in the form of decoupled transfers. And the nature and level, if you look at it by different countries, it varies quite widely across different countries. Marco has already explained some of this, so I won't go into more detail. Just to know that there are significant differences in the level and nature of support across different countries. Given this background, the question was, how can we repurpose this? We know that a lot of the policy action needs to take place at the country level. So here we work with IFPRI and a joint paper with IFPRI using the general equilibrium model, Miragotet, to simulate outcomes going out to 2040 under different scenarios, looking at what would happen if we were to, one, remove the subsidies and to repurpose them for some other purposes within those countries. This just shows that as you look forward to 2040, the baseline results, it's important to set our perspectives in terms of looking at what the outcomes are likely to be. And agricultural value added is expected to increase significantly, but so will agriculture emissions. Agriculture land use goes up slightly, which is not good, which means that the carbon sink that the forests and other natural habitats provide will also reduce. Poverty reduction falls, but then stabilizes after a certain period of time, after about 2030. There's a relatively little gain in terms of extreme poverty. The source of emissions shows the largest source of emissions will continue to be livestock and livestock products, but it's varied across different commodities. Now, in terms of the simulation results, what we see again are very similar results to what Marco has just presented. The impact of emissions on different forms of support shows it has a negative impact on GHG emissions, with the largest impact coming from input subsidies. And overall, when we look at the results, we see good economic efficiency, increase in economic efficiency in terms of overall real national income, and benefits in terms of reduced emissions. But it also has trade-offs in the sense that the farm production is likely to fall. So it does not come without a cost. Subsidies to support farmers in terms of using inputs and providing other kinds of support, other services. And when you remove them, they will have an impact, and they will also increase the price of healthier foods, which is likely to have a negative impact on nutritional outcomes. Now, when you look at in the big scheme of things, those results are as expected. But in terms of bending the arc on climate change and agriculture's contribution to climate change, overall, the removal of support has relatively small impacts. These are not huge in terms of really changing the trajectory. So the question then becomes, if we were to remove all, we simulate removing all domestic support, and we simulate also removing domestic support and market price support, and the results are change a little bit, but one key message that comes from that is that the two instruments work very differently. At the global level, they have very different impacts. I will leave it at that, and we can get into the discussion as to what the impacts might be. Removing market price support, because a lot of that goes to livestock commodities, might actually end up increasing global emissions a little bit as production shifts around the world because of removal of trade barriers. So that, I think, is an important point to note in terms of looking for options on repurposing. And the biggest story, I think, is on what can we do. The removal is a traditional argument that economists have given, and clearly is going to have some impact, but not a huge one. But it does have, and does entail trade-offs. So the question is, can we use that support in different forms, in different ways? And here we simulate different kinds of repurposing options. One is uniform subsidy across all commodities, which is like a decoupled transfer. The other is concentrating only on the carbon efficient crops. One is pure conditionality, where the support is conditioned on reducing GHG emissions and climate smart agriculture, but without investing in new technology, only with current technology. And the last is looking at productivity impacts, And the very last one is saying, okay, fine, let's just take 6% of your current subsidies by country and put them into into R&D to increase agriculture productivity. And that's the last repurposing for public goods simulation. And what you see is quantitatively large impacts, huge impacts. Not only on the economic efficiency, which increases by 1.5% of the real national income globally, but also significant impacts on farm output, huge impacts on nearly 37% decline in agricultural emissions, and significant declines, almost 15 to 18% of decline in healthy food prices, which will deliver significantly better outcomes. So I think the message here is removal is something that is likely not to deliver as much of an impact. It will deliver the impacts, and the impacts will be have to be monitored country by country. They will have varied impacts. But the biggest story is how can we use the same support the same amount of resources to provide better kinds of support to farmers. And so the conclusions that we draw, I mean, there is another slide, but I'm pretty sure I'm out of time. And there is a caveat that I want to come to, and I'll come to that as the last bullet here. So the key conclusions are traditional, or perhaps from a political economy point of view, naive recommendation would be to simply remove or abolish support or subsidies. It improves economic efficiency, reduces emissions, but comes at a cost. It lowers farm output and delivers, increases the cost of healthy diets. Aggregate impacts at the global level are modest. Conditioning support environmental impacts also faces a similar dilemma. It reduces GHGs, but with current technology, it also reduces farm output and raises the cost of healthy foods. A clear message is to repurpose towards productivity enhancing investments, and these can take many different forms, including reducing food loss and waste, which is like getting more with less, or rather producing the same amount with less. That itself has significant impacts, and there can be other means of increasing productivity. And the biggest bang for the buck is to repurpose the support towards emission efficient technologies into R&D directly focused on reducing emission efficient technologies and practices. That gives us the best way forward in terms of outcomes. One caveat that I was mentioning was labor market rigidities. And here, obviously, the results will change country by country. So at a global level, it's a little bit difficult to sort of generalize. But what you do want to note is that as output levels go up significantly, there is going to be a decline in prices. And if labor continues to remain rigidly stuck in the agricultural sector, there is a possibility that the farm incomes will fall. And this is something that needs to be taken care of in terms of investing some of the resources that we get save out of in terms of repurposing the support, to put some of the resources also on human capital development and skills to facilitate labor mobility, as well as removing any policy and institutional impediments there might be on the movement of labor from one sector to the other. I will stop there, Schengen. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions and discuss.
Madhu's presentation complements Marco's presentation very well. And again, he emphasized that removing is not good enough. Repurposing is critical. I think and not just a sort of repurposing subsidies. The key message from him is to use some of the money to increase investment in R&D, to promote further productivity and particularly carbon efficient productivity growth. So increase yield, increase production, but in the meantime, reduce carbon emissions. Now, I have already seen some online questions for Marco and Madhu. The one question is the short term versus long term. The other one is, can we use some of the subsidies to subsidizing consumers to consume more healthy and sustainable foods? And I will come back to that. I think we should have enough time for you to address some of the questions. Now let's move to panel discussion. So we have two panelists from the country and two panelists from the global institutions. So let's start from the countries. The first panelist is Dr. Madofro Ngozi. So he is a CEO of the Ethiopia Agricultural Transformation Agency, ATA. So from a country like Ethiopia, so what do you think, what will be the implication of repurposing of the subsidies? I know in Africa, many countries use input subsidies, particularly fertilizer subsidies, to increase maize production and some of the stable food production. So Professor Dr. Ngozi, you have 3 to 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you, organizers, for having me. I was carefully listening the presentations. Repurposing subsidy. I like repurposing subsidy with our policy. Instead of subsidy, we have selected incentive. So we incentivize instead of subsidizing. And the point is, what are the strategic commodities to be selected for sustainable, looking at the social, the economic, and the environmental dimension. So based on the commodities that are selected, we factor who are the key actors. It's not subsidy or incentive for production per se, but the subsidy and the repurposing the subsidy and incentivizing mechanism is throughout the value chain. There are areas where we can subsidize or incentivize processing, and because most of health-related issues are post-harvest. So the way we handle, the way we transport, the way we store, those are critical environments or segments of the value chain where health is really an issue. So the subsidizing or incentivizing the production is about broadening the base for the value chain. And when we choose commodities, we should depend on trend analysis. So going forward, what would be the population of Ethiopia, for example, and how do we feed the entire population? That requires a little bit of foresight analysis. And in terms of choosing commodities, that also requires trade-off analysis. When you choose one commodity and drop the other one, what is the advantage and what are the disadvantages? That really is critical. On the other hand, when we subsidize a segment of the population and when we don't with the other, or when we subsidize a public and don't subsidize the private sector, that creates inequality, disincentivize the business enterprises along the value chain. So there are many things that we need to consider when we repurpose subsidy. I'm not a promoter of subsidy, but I am a promoter of incentivizing the commodities that we want, not only on the production, but also along the value chain until it reaches the consumption. We can also subsidize the consumer as well. That's why I said it's a range of areas or chains. So in terms of sustainability, by subsidizing something and not subsidizing or incentivize something and disincentivize the other, we don't want to affect the private sector that is responsible for sustainability, because this is a service or this is a business. So we don't want to affect or destabilize the market. So to sum up, subsidy, or if we can call it incentive, could be dependent on locations, even within a country, in area where we have optimal area and suboptimal area. So the way we apply and the way what we pick as a subsidy or as an incentive depends on geography. And so, that has to be very flexible. That has to be context specific. So, maximizing the production alone is not the solution. That's what I would like to underline. So I would stop in there. I used my 3 minutes efficiently. Thank you,
Dr. Ngozi. Yes, I think your point about incentivize the whole value chain actor segments to produce healthy, nutritious, and sustainable foods is very important. So more nuance, whether it's by commodity or by different geographic region or by different part of value chain. Okay, thank you. Now let's move to Ghana. Dr. Felix Asanta. Now he has worked on agriculture innovation systems, particularly in Ghana. You have 3 to 4 minutes. So for a country like Ghana, so what do we take from the two presentations by Marco and Maduro?
No, thank you so much, Schengen, for this opportunity. And also thank you for the two presentations. They were very insightful and thought-provoking. My focus or my position will be more towards somebody coming from a lower middle income economy broadly and situated in the context of Ghana. Yeah, so repurposing agricultural support, perfect. I agree with it. It makes it more efficient, more targeted, and we can see an output. But from a typical middle income economy, there are certain questions we need to ask, and once we're able to answer them, then we can go by that. We need to understand the whole political economy of subsidy, and especially in agriculture in a country like Ghana. Do we have enough money to subsidize or call it incentive? Can we support that, and for how long? And if we decide to support, whether we call it subsidy or incentive, along the value chain, where do we support it so that at the end of the day, the consumer or the population benefit from it? And for me, I think we having a subsidy program that is over a period consistent is very key for us to benefit from a subsidy program. And when we start thinking about repurposing, there are certain issues that come quickly to mind when we want to go into this repurposing. And one typical thing is the trade-off between food security crops vis-a-vis nutrition and healthy food or crops. Currently, most of our incentives and subsidies go towards typical food security crops. So we have the maize, the cassava, the root and tubers, because by economies of scale, we're doing it better. Now, if we decide to repurpose this into nutritious and healthy foods, are we sure our subsidy or incentives will be such that there'll be less imports of the nutritious food coming from outside? So for example, when you take poultry products, are we able to subsidize our farmers such that we are not going to get imports coming from countries that are heavily subsidizing their country? So these are some of the trade-offs that we need to do the calculation very well. If not, we repurpose and we lose out. You lose out by providing the incentive and then influx of import of that particular commodity that you want to support. So if you notice, for instance, in Ghana, most of the support goes into production and typical food security. Now we are trying to support through the planting for food, some vegetables and animal products, but still we get competition from imported items. So that is one of the trade-offs that I want to come out with. Now let's look at infrastructure. Now, if we repurpose to support nutritious or healthy diet, we should also have it in mind, the infrastructure, because just producing a healthy product doesn't mean it will get to the consumer in a healthy status. So we need to find a way of investing in infrastructure in terms of cold chains to make sure that the nutritious food along the chain is kept in a healthy form, such that when it gets to the consumer, the full nutritive benefits will be derived. And that is also one of a key challenge if we want to go in that area. So we need to look at the whole value chain if we want to repurpose an incentive, but not look at because it's a nutritious crop or food. So we assume that it will get onto the table in that form. And one last thing that I also want to talk about is the incentives along the value chain, which I've talked about, and currently we're focusing more on production and other things. And then are we sure that if we provide the subsidy or the incentive for the milk, meat products, and others, as a country will be competitive? So the whole area of trade becomes very, very, very important. And for me, if we're able to address some of these issues that I've raised, I think repurposing is more focused and targeted and will help improve the nutritional value of citizens and the population. Thank you very much.
You're muted, Schengen.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah, I forgot to introduce Professor Felix Asante. He has worked with me some time ago. So now he has risen to the Vice Chancellor for Research, Innovation, and Development at the University of Ghana. I think he made it two important points. One is on trade. So we need to take into consideration of traded products in comparison with domestic produced products in terms of the impact on nutrition and the environment. The second is the infrastructure. It's not just producing healthy and nutritious foods. You also have to move this product through the whole value chain to consumers. Now, I have seen lots of questions in Q&A. I hope Marco and Madhu could help to answer these questions online, just in case we don't have enough time. So now let's move to the next two panelists who are the global players. The first is Francisco Branca. So he is a top nutritionist who is in charge of nutrition at the World Health Organization. Franco, if you can keep your intervention within 3 to 4 minutes, that would be great.
Sure, thank you very much, Schengen. I really appreciated the presentation. I'd like to make some quick points. First of all, we are aware that there are subsidies that do not help healthy diet. That's a fact. Let me give you two examples. First one, palm oil production. Subsidies and other kinds of investment along the value chain of palm oil production have made it the cheapest ingredient for many foods. And palm oil has a lot of saturated fat, as you well know. So we are flooded by this component, this ingredient that is not supportive to a healthy diet. Second one, subsidies on maize, which have led to greater availability and low price of sweeteners such as high fructose corn syrup. So what I heard today is very good news. Repurposing can save 200,000 lives per year. Actually, it's the first time I hear this message here at the UN Food System Summit. So it's a very important message. The other important message I heard was about government investment. So this is not about only the prices. This is about productivity enhancing investment and about actually shaping the food system and shaping the value chain with public money. So I think that's the important element. So this is about not spending less money, not reducing making it worse for the peasants, but actually helping them. But I do agree that unless we have a value chain approach, and this has been mentioned by Felix and others, probably the impact on nutrition are not going to be maximized. I mean, we don't need only more apples. We also need to make sure that those apples are not made into apple juice. And that's why other tools, including other price tools, are critical to shift diet. So for example, subsidies should not be considered separately from the issue of taxation. The whole price structure that has to be changed if we want to shape food consumption. But finally, really, I believe that this kind of economic analysis are absolutely critical. There's been a lot of discussion in the summit around the true cost accounting. I think that's definitely a very important starting point to reshape policies in government. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Francisco. Now, one question I have for you, but you don't need to answer it now. We are running out of time. Is, can we use some of the subsidies to provide vouchers or direct income transfer to some of the very poor people to, let's say, to improve their access to nutritious, healthy food? Anyway, so Patrick Webb, is really well, with important global figure in producing several global reports, including some of the reports from the global panel, and he's a professor from the Tufts University. So Patrick, you have 3 to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Schengen, and thanks everyone who have already spoken. I think this is great. I think we are exactly where we need to be. This discussion is where the Food Summit needs to be going, not just focusing on commitments, but on looking at the nuances, the potential trade-offs, the possible political economy issues around choices, yes, policy choices, investment choices across the entire food system. What I'm hearing is that there's huge value in digging deeper through modeling into what if scenarios, right? We all know models are just approximations of reality. But what these models have shown is that there are often unexpected outcomes, and the net effects of policy choices can lead to both positives and potential negatives simultaneously. And it's that simultaneous dimension that is key to any discussion of food systems. We need to understand and embrace the complexity of the challenges that face us, which are climate-related, health and nutrition-related, agroeconomy, ecology-related, wage and labor-related. There's complexity there. And so we are already moving far beyond the old, what Madhur called the naive, polarized debate. Subsidies are good. No, subsidies are bad. Remove them. No, keep them, right? We move now towards what Schengen is calling optimizing various instruments. And of course, subsidies are not one thing. They are one element among many possible ways to incentivize, not just production, but consumption and everything in between. So embracing that complexity really matters on the input side, and then on the output side, embracing the complexity, the reality that a wide range of possible outcomes, some of which are good, some of which are not so good, are possible. And therefore we need to understand those, put in place do no harm safety nets, and ensure that whatever we do is focused on optimization and ensuring that policies are coherent in achieving common goals, right? So it's not just about economics, it's not just about exports, it's not just about GDP. We have common goals that allow for multi-win outcomes. And I think this is the key going forward, and the ability to use and build on and expand these kinds of models is critically important to post-summit years when governments are going to have to make the decisions on how to implement the commitments made. Thank you, Schengen.
Thank you, Patrick. I mean, once again, he emphasized the complexity and a different context, optimizing. Now, the word I used in applying for a research grant, by the way, optimizing the subsidies. And okay, can we have probably a couple of minutes for Marco and Madhur to answer some of the questions, short-term versus long-term? Can we use some of the subsidy money to support the land management to reduce carbon emission? Marco and Madhur, please keep it within maybe 30 seconds, definitely not more than 1 minute.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm trying to type in the Q&A as well to answer some of those. I mean, short, long term, I think that's very essential. And I think The repurposing in any particular country, that can be done, and I think discussions are ongoing, but this restructuring of subsidies that would make sure that also low and middle income countries can share in the benefits of a reformed subsidy scheme are more medium to long term, but the discussions on that, I think, need to be started right now and at global fora. So I would say, yes, there is this differentiation between short term, what can be done in the short term and in the long term. And briefly, I want to say about consumption. So we just modeled the impact, the basically indirect impact on consumption by changes by the production related changes in relative prices. Of course, it would be great to also couple changes in production incentives with changes in consumption incentives. And there are a whole range of consumer-facing policies that could help consumers adopt healthy and more sustainable diets. Also there, for example, for the full pricing of foods at the supermarket, that would include health and environmental costs, would be important. The reform of national dietary guidelines would be important. Public procurement, adjusting public procurement would be important, and so on. So there are a whole range of policies that could be done, and that would be beneficial to think about it in tandem.
Okay, Madhur.
Yeah, thanks. Great questions and lots of important insights. I actually, Patrick has put it really well in the sense that these are models that give you what if scenarios to sort of inform the political economy debates. We are actually working with the Just Rural Transition and have a technical assistance program to help countries think through. All of these policy solutions and issues are country specific. Choices are going to be country specific. I completely agree with Dr. Asante. It has to be looked at locally. At the global level, I think the important point is, and this is particularly important for climate change, what happens in one country, is great. But if you end up sort of importing, if you level the playing field and all the points about trade and policies, I think, and the uneven policy applied policies is important. But if you level the playing field, and if I don't produce a bad commodity but end up importing it bad from a GHG point of view, the overall emissions will not increase. So this is where I think the focus on consumer policies becomes important. A lot of other issues, and of course, the infrastructure. So this is the start of the discussion. This is to inform the debates. And as I said, we are taking a food system approach, which has to target the entire food system, not just the farm. As a matter of fact, we refocused our attention from agriculture to food system, because the value chain and the consumer side is so important. And nutrition is, of course, extremely important. And what happens to the food system is impacted by policies, and I think that's the point about incentives. All of the economic agents in the food system, are economic agents. They respond to incentives. So we have to make sure that the foundation is laid down. Of course, some countries will need support, and one can think of where subsidies are sensible. We try to stay away from the word subsidies because some subsidies are bad, other subsidies are good. We want to subsidize environmentally friendly and nutrition friendly commodities. So one has to be a little bit careful about how we sort of cast this debate. It's not just a black and white. It's not an ideological debate. The idea is we want to work together with both the developed and developing countries, and I think we have global dialogues going on, along with, as I mentioned, with JRT, to sort of bring this to a table, bring both sets of countries to the same table, and let's start discussing what is in our common interest in terms of looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhur. I wanted to have 10-second intervention from Francisco. Is it possible to provide vouchers for consumers to purchase vegetables and fruits?
Absolutely. This has to be part of the solution. So having public food procurements through public institutions, what you offer in the schools or in the hospitals, and what you offer through the social protection systems. We have a lot of good examples of this being a successful way to do it. It can be done through vouchers. It can also be done through somehow cash transfer, which are made conditional. That's an important investment that has to complement the investment on production.
Thank you. Thank you, Francisco. Okay, so time is up. Now it's very difficult for me to wrap up the very rich discussion. I think this sort of global analysis is so critical. What we need to do next is to move to the country level, even regional level. Like, let's say for China, now we have already begun to look at these issues with my colleagues from Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences, Chinese Academy of Sciences, Beijing University, to use a similar sort of framework to analyze how can we really optimize the subsidies to reduce the carbon emission, the carbon neutrality 2060 in China, and to improve health and the nutrition of everybody. So we have learned quite a bit. So a couple of key messages from our study. One is we needed to use some of the subsidies to innovate multiple wind technologies. That certain technologies can reduce the carbon emission, improve the yield, improve the nutrition at the same time. So we need to do that. And then reducing food waste and loss. I mean, we have not discussed much today. And then improve the nutrition and quality of the food items through the whole value chain. And lastly, is to change consumers' behavior. So the China developed a national nutrition guideline in 2016. We did a very simple model to analyze the impact on health and environment. So health impact is clear. The millions of deaths will be avoided if the Chinese population follow that guideline. But equally important, if the Chinese population follow that guideline, the carbon emission from agricultural activity will be reduced by 20%. We can do more if the Chinese follow the flexitarian diet Marco has just mentioned. So I think we need to do more at a country level, whether Ethiopia, Uganda, Nigeria, India. I really hope the global panel, or maybe after the food system summit, we need to come to the country level to use the data, evidence, and a modeling results to push for the food system transformation without politicize the issue, without bringing any ideology and philosophy into the debate. Okay, let me thank you. Thank you, the global panel secretariat, and also thank you all the speakers for your great contribution. It's very rich. I think all the PowerPoints will be shared with you. This event probably is also recorded. I think our secretariat can confirm. And so the event, yes, will be uploaded in the website. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.